Good evening and welcome to episode 33 of the Give Me the Remote podcast. It is the 20th of February 2019. My name is John and I am fortunate enough to be joined in the pod by...
Sheridan. Me.
Say hello.
Hello. I'll do my intro my own way, thank you.
Greetings world. Okay, and Sheridan, what would you like to talk about first?
Well, seeing as we literally just finished watching it 5 minutes ago, it was a lot of cramming for this episode. Let's do The Darkest Hour.
Why have I been forced to send for Churchill? His record is a catastrophe.
Let me see your true qualities, your lack of vanity.
Yeah, my iron will.
Your sense of humour.
Ho, ho, ho.
Yes, so Gary Oldman's great Oscar bait.
And successful Oscar bait.
Yes, it was a masterful performance, I might add. It's about Winston Churchill. It's about the Darkest Hour, the fall of France, Churchill's speeches to rouse the British public and keep his own job, importantly. Now, I've got to say, I didn't watch this, even though I know a lot about Churchill, and I would go so far as to say I'm a bit of a fan.
Well, I was going to say, I think the reason we had to end up stretching it over 2 nights and watching the last minute is because whenever I asked you a question, you would very dramatically pause it and inform me of all the historical facts surrounding my question.
Many of which were not addressed in this movie.
Which I've appreciated, but at the same time, it turned a 125-minute movie into probably about two and a half hours.
Yes. Now, I want to say something, which is that the only thing in this world worse than a Churchill hater is a Churchill fanboy. They're both revolting.
Well, I would say this was the latter.
Oh, I thought this was quite balanced.
I have read some articles that basically call it Brexit propaganda.
It became that, but the historicity of what it's trying to document is largely inarguable. The fact that the whole idea of we don't need Europe, we can go it alone is pretty much the driving theme behind Brexit. Doesn't take away from the events of 1940.
No, and also this kind of stuff kind of bores me a bit, but then I do find reading about it quite interesting. But they definitely seem to have downplayed the importance of Labour in pushing for no negotiations with Hitler. The things that I read seem to indicate that Labour was just as important in making that happen as Churchill was.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
but Labour is not put in here as being in the movie as being very important. Key in
Clement Attlee's speech to bring down Chamberlain is played in very large part at the start of the movie.
I know that's right at the beginning.
Yeah, and the fact that it was only because of Labour's demands that the Conservative appeasement faction wasn't allowed to form government is...
Yeah, but they kind of had to explain that because you get to this point where you're like, why is this guy leading a party that all hates him?
Yeah. It is covered. I don't think that it was... You can't accuse them of not portraying it. They definitely centred the drama around Churchill.
It's a one-man... I mean, the whole thing's a one-man show.
Although I think George VI was played quite beautifully.
I actually think Kristen Scott Thomas was probably the standout role as Churchill's wife in the supporting cast.
I felt her scenes were often quite odd.
Oh, I thought she brought a bit of sort of humour and
talking to the camera in parts for no reason, totally divorced from the rest of the storyline.
Well, the thing is, right, there's actually no other character in this film that has... You could hardly even call them supporting roles. They're minor roles.
Yeah. This is the Churchill show.
Yeah. But I thought for what she had, she gave quite a light, pleasant, sort of joyful experience as to what I guess it would have been like to be married to someone who is, literally got the weight of the world on his shoulders.
Yeah, I would say the first season of The Crown could actually be seen as a bit of a companion piece to this in its depiction of Churchill and Lady Churchill. And I think it might be episode 9 of that season, which is just about Churchill and his painter and the dialogue between them, which I think that made The Crown, from from something into something much greater than it could otherwise have been. But okay, Churchill is an interesting character. This shows a lot of Churchill's interestingness, particularly his whiskey for breakfast and his frail health at this stage of life.
So,
and,
apparently, fun fact, Gary Oldman smoked 400 cigars while making this film that cost $20,000.
That's so awesome to be able to put that on the investors to just make that many Stokes.
But I was thinking, how do you must have to write some massive disclaimer to let an actor smoke them. He must have said, I'm not doing it unless I'm smoking them for real.
Yeah, and I imagine whatever sort of insurance Gary Oldman covers would have had to cover the fact that his health has been severely compromised.
And I guess maybe you don't really see him puffing on them a lot.
Although there is a scene where he lights one up in a fictitious scene in the London Underground where I was thinking, I guess if you've never ridden the Underground before, you don't realise how antisocial you're being by lighting up a big cigar in that confined space.
Everyone would have smoked on the Underground.
Yeah, they're all smoking little tiny rollies, which is a totally different kettle of fish to a big fat Cuban. And I'm pretty sure he was smoking Cubans.
Well, that must be why they cost $20,000.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the makeup? Because Gary Oldman is obviously unrecognisable. A lot of prosthetics and makeup going on there.
I mean, I thought it looked like Churchill in his what was he, 60s then? I thought that was all quite believable. I felt like I was watching Churchill. I felt like I was listening to Churchill. I did thoroughly enjoy that.
Yeah, I'm actually torn a bit because
we've watched so many Churchills over the last 20 years.
I know. I do think you still lose something when you're covering so much of the face.
Well, they had John Lithgow playing Churchill in The Crown, and he was physically quite jarring at first, and then he became compelling in the role. Whereas in this, I thought Oldman just looked like how I expected Churchill to look. I mean, they even make a joke where Churchill sees a baby and the mother says, "Oh, he looks like you." And he's like, "They all look like me."
Yeah. I mean, that's why I'm torn, though, because it is an amazing performance, but there's something about it that I found very distancing, and I think it's the makeup.
Fair enough. I mean, I thought there's a couple of things that were jarringly, historically, they fit the myth, but not the history. And I did also think, I know the movie can only be so long, but they sort of had this moment where the king turns up, literally visits Churchill at his house and says, "Come on, lad, let's get up and fight him." And there's no explanation for the audience that the king's deposed brother was ready to take the reins back if there was a peace deal with the Nazis. So he was fighting for his own position as much as Churchill was at that point.
Yeah, I know, but this was the Churchill show, so
yeah.
they couldn't really go into that. And there was there are some obvious historical inaccuracies, like they have the king listening to Churchill delivering a speech on radio when there was no broadcast radio at that time.
Yeah, there was.
No, not live.
Might have been live, but it was recorded and it was free.
But they make out like he's listening to it live. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I should have said live broadcast radio. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Okay. So they tweak things, for my to get my inner pedant on the small ships in the Operation Dynamo made up less than 10% of the rescued soldiery. They were just an inspiring little part. It was kind of
for anyone who doesn't know, Operation Dynamo, which I now have learnt ad nauseum, is the Dunkirk. So basically the movie Dunkirk, the civilian fleet that brought all the soldiers back from
rescued
Dunkirk.
A small number of those soldiers. Yes.
You see why the movie experience went on for so
long. Yeah, I think that's all forgivable simply because it's a movie, not a documentary.
Yeah.
And I think there's things like there's one conversation on the phone with Roosevelt that is a compaction of a number of telegrams and letters, and again doesn't quite explain what was going on, but just sort of hints. And I guess it did a job that it hinted there wasn't a lot of help coming from America at that moment.
Yeah. You do definitely get a sense of the isolation that Britain would have been feeling at that time.
Yeah, and there is the fact that what the Nazis and Hitler were really good at was getting inside the heads of their opponents. They were never half as strong as they appeared to be. They just got inside the heads of people, and they had a great deal of success with that. And they came very close to getting inside the heads of the British leadership and knocking them out of the war as well.
One of the things you probably don't really get a sense of, though, is that Britain was at that time the most arguably, or one of two most powerful military nations in the world that had, like, India and Canada very much still part of the Commonwealth. And they're kind of portrayed as we're just little Britain. We're just little Britain on an island.
Our island nation. I mean, the speech itself, of course, references the empire across the seas and the old world coming to the rescue of the new. I did like at the end where they have Halifax saying Churchill's weaponised the English language, and it wasn't really explained in the movie, because what that was talking about was the effect that speech had on the United States and changing the US's attitude to the war, which was absolutely decisive in the war. Oh, geez. Have you got anything else you want to say on this one?
No. I'd be interested to know what you...
I'm going to give it a solid 4 stars.
Yeah, I'm again regretting not having the half star in the mark.
Yeah.
Forces one to really nail their
Colours
to the mast.
In a Churchillian sort of way.
Yeah. It's a somewhat reluctant 4 stars.
Reluctant 4 stars.
I think it's a really... it's a good movie to watch for, like, refreshing, I guess, an understanding of the political history that went behind the war. Because you see all these movies, in the past decade, they're all like about the battles. They're all the big battle scenes, the dying soldiers, but this was a straight up political drama.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's fair because there was a political drama. There was indecision at the heart of the British ruling establishment as to how to proceed.
So it's good to see a different perspective, if somewhat, perhaps a little bit too much propaganda and...
And always remember, people, the ruling elites of your country will rat you out in a second.
Where did that come from?
That's what Halifax and his buddies were all getting ready to do.
Oh, right.
Yeah, they're like, we can make a deal with the Nazis. We'll be fine.
God, if only we had a Churchill.
That's what Tony Abbott wants to be. All right. So, what's next?
Well, in an attempt to just flip everything completely on its back, I'm going to say let's review Sex Education.
The return to sexualized children.
Still British though.
I've noticed you're pretending to masturbate, and I was wondering if you wanted to talk about it.
Oh, I wish my mum was a sex guru.
So, why don't you start by telling me your earliest memory of your scrotum?
It was kind of British.
It's a British...
It's notionally set in Britain, but that high school is an American high school.
Well, we'll talk about that because I've got that as well. So, Sex Education... Netflix, first series. Gillian Anderson plays a sex therapist who's a single mother looking after her teenage son.
In the most beautiful house, in the most beautiful valley in England, overlooking the river, in a house that I can only imagine would cost £10 million.
Probably. She had to sell a lot of those books about masturbating or whatever they were. So she's the mother of a teenage son called Otis, and to be honest, the show's not about Gillian Anderson. She is a supporting cast member, very well played, and a very interesting character.
Very much about her relationship with Otis, though.
True. So Otis is a bit of a nerdy teenager who has a friend called Eric, who's a queer African migrant. I think it's syndicated as an African.
Jamaican migrant, probably.
Okay.
But anyway, yes, he is black.
Who is played, I have to say, fabulously by, and I hope I don't mangle this spelling, by an actor called Nuti Gatwa, who is a Rwandan.
Okay.
But I just think that character is fabulous. And he's so heart-wrenching, and
he brings almost all the drama and jeopardy that makes this show work.
It's just, and he's like energetic and fun, but sad, and you feel sorry for him. It's heartbreaking. It's a heartbreaking character, but joyful and all those things that you want from a three-dimensional character.
Yeah. So I don't think we're giving anything away because it's very clear very early.
I think we would probably...
He's gay. He's struggling with coming from a very conservative family. He's struggling with being a young gay man at a still heteronormative high school.
And he's black, so he's got that
He's
as
already
well.
an outsider. Yeah.
Anyway, so and it's also his friendship with Otis it's really beautiful to watch on screen. I think it's a really enjoyable story. But so Otis develops a crush on a girl, a troubled teen called Maeve, who looks almost identical to Margot Robbie, but
Is not
Margot Robbie.
Yes.
Um,
Definitely was made up to look like Margot Robbie, though.
well, I think she just looks like Margot Robbie.
Yeah, okay. I mean, there is a certain scraggy, rough chick teenager that is an immortal look of torn stockings and short shorts.
Anyway, so in an attempt to...
outgrown peroxided hair.
Yes.
Yeah.
In an attempt to make money, she comes up with a plan that Otis should be a sex therapist to all of the kids at school because his mum's a sex therapist. He understands how to talk about sex and sort of therapeutic... psychotherapy
Yeah, I mean,
practice.
He apes his mother.
I'll get there.
And he seems to do it reasonably convincingly within the confines of the show, of the narrative.
Yes. So, I mean, that's the general... And then all the kids are just having sex, really.
There's a lot of teenage sex, which, I mean, yes, all the actors are over 18, I imagine. But
do you see actual nipples?
You see a lot of nipples.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
it's funny though. It's
as a connoisseur of the female form, they're in some pretty good nick. But it's a little uncomfortable to be watching them on the couch these days.
I have to say, maybe it's just my female gaze.
Yeah.
I mean, the sex scenes aren't. A lot of them aren't very sexual. Some of them are.
I was going to say.
Some of them are.
And hey, there's some gay sex in this as well for balance.
There's quite a bit of gay and lesbian sex.
Although the lesbian sex is mostly played for laughs.
That's what I mean. There's not some of the scenes are humorous and some of them are very, very awkward. And then some of them are a bit
But it pretty
sexy.
much opens with just full-on teenage boobs flying everywhere sex.
You know, it's the interesting thing about Netflix. It's really kind of changed that dynamic with sex on small screen because traditionally American TV, which has been the bulk of our TV, even though this is British, so the context is a bit off, but anyway,
Kind of British.
is very much shied away from sex. Like, there's no sex on American sitcoms, but Netflix, it's pretty open to it. I mean,
yeah, well, it's got its child protection systems. So
and a lot of,
you know,
queer sex. I mean, Orange is the New Black. There's a lot on there.
Although I would say the lesbian sex in Orange is the New Black is often purveyed for the male gaze, but...
Well, maybe it's just for, I don't know. Perhaps I'm not going to critique that.
Sure.
I guess HBO kind of started the sex on screen, though, really, to be fair.
Subscription services, more age controls. It's not being broadcast willy-nilly into people's houses, so there is a lot more mature content.
I mean, the sex on the TV show Oz, which, I mean, I think that was probably the first breakout show
that
of
was
HBO.
Violent gay sex.
That was intense. I don't even know if they do that these days, but it's been a long time since I watched it. I can't believe Oz is... I mean, that would have to be nearly 15 years old, wouldn't it?
There you go.
Probably older. Anyway, let's get back on track. Where were we?
Sex education.
Yes, so when you first start watching this show, you're kind of like, I don't know what time I'm in, because they were all
literally.
wearing these really...
Was it the 50s,
It's
60s,
like
70s,
weirdly
80s, 90s?
70s mixed with 90s grunge. Like, they're quite sort of hipster children, but they're not carrying any mobile phones, and they're all living in these sort of modernist...
the cars are very old as well.
Yeah, like modernist houses, and they're in this massive school, like huge school.
And the school has a swimming pool. And, I mean, I went to a pretty posh school, but we didn't have a swimming pool.
Well...
And yet somehow the girl who's living with no support on money she scrounges from getting Otis to give sex therapy is at this school. Now, she might have been some sort of local scholarship because she is very smart, but it's never explained how all these socioeconomic stratas are rubbing together in this luxurious school.
Yeah, it's not clear at all. And they don't wear uniforms like most British schools wear.
Not all.
It doesn't seem like a very British school.
There are exceptions to every rule in a British school that might explain this. To have all of those exceptions in the one place seemed downright peculiar.
And they have all these like huge frat party like in mansions and things, and
yeah, well, and everyone lives within walking distance of each other, and between the mansions and the slums and the school and the river, and
I mean,
the setting seemed improbable. The school seemed wildly improbable, particularly the Americanization of the school. Like they're all running around in leather jackets and the school's logo. It all seemed very Americanized. Now, there are schools in the UK that do have an American bent to them. But again, I just didn't find it plausible that exception was also piled on with all these others. It was...
Yeah, and there's all that intercom system of Otis to the principal's office, which... I don't know, it's very American.
Or Jackson suddenly jumping on the intercom and telling everyone he had an announcement to make.
And then he does the song. That was all a bit... Number. Yeah, that was a bit strange.
So the school is hard to swallow. And a lot of the stuff in it is difficult to believe, and the storylines can be extremely weak. And yet, there are moments that are heartbreakingly real and you feel for the characters. So even though they're in a somewhat fantasy situation, the characters are still very resonant, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think there's some really important messaging for young people as they embark on sexual experience.
Number one lesson is high school is not for sex. University is for sex.
Is it?
Yeah, well, that's what everyone says. But,
not this show, they're all having sex.
No, in this show, well, there's no high school in the world where they're having as much sex as this one.
True.
Not even Riverdale.
But there is some quite important, there's a lot of discussion in there about consent and, girls not just doing what guys want, being able to be queer if that's what you feel, and, experimenting with that if you... And a bit like a lot of respect about not sharing, nudes and things that people send you through mobile devices and things like that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things about dealing with rejection and being sensible about it. And just because one person doesn't like you doesn't invalidate you, but you've got to allow them the validity of their feelings.
Yeah. So I'd probably say if you're a parent, just... let your kids watch it. Maybe don't watch it with them. Cause
don't watch it with them.
That'd be awkward.
Just in fact, tell them you don't want them to watch it, but then just leave it watchable. And then you're guaranteed the message will get across. Just make a little mistake and leave that one accessible. But I mean, look, it's well worth watching, for all it has enormous flaws. I'm slightly concerned about Sex Education Season 2, which I now feel is inevitable.
It has been confirmed,
Yeah,
yes.
there you go. But it was fun. Gillian Anderson's character is fun, and I know there's a whole generation of men slightly older than me who fetishize Gillian Anderson, and they're going to get everything they want out of this. So I guess it's a solid 4 stars with some reservations and caveats.
Yeah, I'm going to go 4 stars too.
All right. So what's next?
Bohemian Rhapsody.
So now what?
This is when the operatic section comes in.
Oh, the operatic section, yeah.
Probably good timing, actually, just before Oscars.
Wasn't it just?
Because it's definitely up there for some Oscars. So I think most people should probably know what this film is about, given it cost $50 million but made a whopping $853 million at the box office, which I think in this day and age is quite a feat.
I struggled to see where they spent the $50 million, to be honest, but...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But when you think that, I mean, Churchill costs $30 million, I've realised I think $30 million seems to be the going rate for films these days.
Yeah, I mean, Churchill $30 million, I mean, there were a lot of scenes in the House of Commons, in a replica House of Commons with thousands of people. That's expensive to do, whereas Queen, it's mostly just CGI crowds clapping their hands over their heads.
True. So it is the biopic of Freddie Mercury. I think it's billed as a biopic of Queen, but I don't think that could be argued by anyone. It's definitely about Freddie.
I felt a lot that the band, and I know from the stories of production before it came out, the band inserted themselves very heavily in parts and told the movie's producers to go away and make it less about Freddie and more about them. But it was still a lot about Freddie, and I feel the band were probably justified in those complaints.
Yeah. So as to your question about where the $50 million went, the film does culminate in the now famous Live Aid performance by Queen.
A shot-for-shot remake of the last 20 minutes of the concert.
They filmed the entire thing. They filmed the entire Live Aid performent.
Queen's Live Aid performance.
Queen's Live Aid performance.
Because it would have been really dumb to do Eurythmics. But,
yeah. For several reasons. But
hey, I'd like to see that movie too.
True. Actually, it probably would be an interesting movie. Yeah, so, I mean, that would have just taken, a long time. But they apparently meticulously redid a lot of his wardrobe. They even got Adidas to remake the shoes that he was wearing because they couldn't find an exact replica.
I imagine Adidas would have taken
pretty
that phone
happy.
call and gone, oh yeah, no problem.
This was like the attention to detail that they were. I mean, there was a massive amount of fan boy and girling and whatever else going along in this movie.
There's a lot of very wooden moments in this movie that feel almost like some sort of high school matinee. We're all performing for free. What's that, Roger? Freddie's in trouble. Well,
there are some historical inaccuracies in this as well because Freddie Mercury had not been diagnosed with HIV before the Live Aid, and even if he had been, because there's some dispute about when he became aware of it, because he remained very private about it.
Yeah.
The band definitely did not know about him having HIV at that time. And they had also not been split up. They had been on a world tour immediately prior to Live Aid.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of dramatic license.
There's a lot of tweaking things around. And there's huge chunks of... I speak as a moderate Queen fan, in that I know quite a lot about them, but I don't own any T-shirts. I did have a poster once. In that it does narrow a lot of... It's a band that's been around for a long time. It's a band that's done a lot. And this is a small snapshot, and then they try and cram a few bits from the edges into that snapshot. And I think in terms of telling the band's story as a starting point to introduce people to the story, I think it's all reasonably forgivable.
Look, I mean, I have to say, I went into this movie as someone who would have generally described themselves as someone who did not like Queen.
Right.
I didn't get it. I was like, what is this stupid rock opera rubbish? Why do their songs go for 8 minutes?
Only one of them.
I was like, who is this band? Like, they're all different. I don't get it. But this movie made me actually like them. And because it explained what they were about as a band. And watching the way they created their music, I was like, I actually get this band now, whereas I've never got at them before. So I will have to credit this movie as making me probably now become a person who won't switch the radio if Queen comes on.
Wow, there we go. They've turned you around. As a Queen fan, I would say one thing they conveyed really well, which is that they were a band made up of quite different people. And they kept their persona on stage in quite sweet ways. You know, John Deacon, the bassist, who the movie did a reasonably good job of showing that a lot of Queen's success was actually his genius in coming up with things the audience could get involved with.
Yeah.
And his killer bass lines, which those bass lines are often the most recognisable part of Queen songs.
Well, they've been sampled by a lot of other bands, sometimes without Queen.
Yeah, well, they did sue over Vanilla Ice ripping off that one. But, he was always dressed in just unbelievably daggy, almost mum jeans, and daggy shirts. So they were always they gave a perception of being a variety, a cross-section of humanity. They made music for a cross-section of humanity. Critics always hated them. Record companies never much liked them. Fans just really like going along to their shows and joining into stuff. And they were reasonably smart early on to say, oh, fans are trying to join into this stuff. Let's write some songs the fans can join into. And they show that evolution reasonably well in the film as well. And the big thing was they toured all over the world into these weird niches, particularly when they had an openly gay...
he wasn't openly gay.
Later in the career he was, though. And they were still playing places in South America and in Asia and in Africa that would normally not welcome...
I don't know if I would... look, I don't... My Queen history's off, obviously. But I'm not sure you could describe him as being necessarily openly gay. I mean, he never... He had sorry, I can't remember the name of the long-term male partner he was with, Jim Hutton. I think it is.
Only sort
who
of comes
features
into the relationship
in,
late, but yeah. There's a sweet scene where they show them meeting.
Yeah, they never appeared as a couple in public. They would be often photographed together.
Okay.
So I'm not sure about that, but I might be wrong.
To return to my point, though, that they played big stadiums all around what we would probably at the time have called the developing world. And they were much better at playing big crowds than probably any other band in the world. And when Live Aid came along, the reason they blew things away was because all the other bands that were used to playing in front of 200 people in Camden Village, but were really red hot in the New Musical Express, just didn't know how to play crowds that big. Because, when you shout to the audience, it's going to take 30 seconds for the sound from your voice to get out to the back of the stadium and for the crowd sound to come back to you, and you've got to build that into the performance. But it's got, if you're a Queen fan, if you're a lightweight Queen fan, it's got all your favourite songs. If you're a heavyweight Queen fan, it misses the last half of the career.
Well, because it does stop at Live Aid, which is, what is that, like 7 or 8 years or something?
Yeah. I would say Greatest Hits Volume 1 of Queen is most of the stuff covered in here. If you have never heard it on your streaming service, have a listen to Greatest Hits Volume 2. There's a lot of very good material in there too.
What did you think of Rami Malek's performance as Freddie Mercury?
Masterful, I would say.
Yeah, I think that without him, this film would be... I don't think I would have enjoyed it anywhere near as much.
He was so good at capturing, because Freddie Mercury was, for most of his life, quite a funny-looking guy.
He was a very odd-looking person.
But he just had this capacity when he was on stage to project and suddenly become charismatic. But he wasn't naturally charismatic when he wasn't performing.
Yeah.
And Rami Malek absolutely got that, and he pulled off the transformation, or albeit he was doing it with the help of, dedicated movie cameras and lighting. But
apparently, he spent a lot of time voice coach, training to wear those teeth, preparing for this role. And it shows, I think, he's very... he does capture his body language and everything. He had to do a movement coach. Apparently he studied Liza Minnelli dancing because that's what Freddie Mercury used to look at. Like, he went, deep Freddie Mercury. And I think it pays off for him. Interestingly, Sacha Baron Cohen was initially on this project to play Freddie Mercury.
Yeah, I'd heard that. Sacha Baron Cohen probably would have done it very well as well.
I think it would have been quite a different movie.
Yeah, he's probably also a little tall for it. That would have been a problem. Because Freddie Mercury was quite compact. But yeah, that's...
Actually, just as an aside, so Rami Malek, he's been a pretty C-grade actor until this point.
Mr. Robot was quite a big role, but anyway.
And so, that would be what, B grade?
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, so apparently a few years ago, he just said to his agent, I'm sick of playing what he called acceptable terrorists because they're the only roles he could get because he has this Middle Eastern appearance. And he just instructed his agent, I'm not taking any more roles like that. And, that's so brave, really, because that was his livelihood.
When you're relying on food on your table.
And it's amazingly paid off with this. He's probably he's going to be a big-time actor now, I think.
Well, we'll see how the Oscars flow. I think the fact
He's got to be really in line for it.
the fact that Queen have been booked to play the Oscars is a very good indication.
Yeah. He won a Golden Globe. He won a BAFTA. He's right. And this movie ticks all the Oscar boxes.
Yeah, it probably
Biopic,
does.
singer,
It
died.
Well. Yeah. But at the same time, I do actually think it is in parts quite wooden.
I think the thing, I mean, maybe even this review's a bit of an example. We have spent 50% of this review at least talking about Queen.
Yeah.
So the subject matter is so unbelievably interesting. And I think this movie, and I'm a bit torn about it, right? Because, I mean, the whole HIV gay thing is a glaring omission in this film.
Well, except that he actually introduces the HIV ahistorically.
But they have to do that because they cut the movie off at the end of Love, and they didn't mention it at all. They would have been completely...
Yeah. I thought they made it very clear that he was having a lot of gay sex. Whether they... I mean, did you actually want to see the wang out? Was that...
No, but what I'm... And I'm a bit torn, though, because Freddie Mercury as a person, too, never really spoke very publicly about it, and also didn't want to be... you know, a person that was seen as being like a poster boy or...
Well, his solo albums were literally gay poster boys.
No, but for HIV.
Yeah,
he didn't want to be seen as being victimised and being like the... put out there as the example of see what happens to you if you're a gay man and stop having unsafe sex. I mean, he didn't want that.
There was the music video they made for I Want to Break Free where they did it in drag. And I mean, I don't know how true it was in the movie. He got angry saying, it was the rest of you who thought this was a good idea. I didn't even want to do it. Now everyone's mocking me.
You know, so what he wanted in life was probably very similar to what was shown in the film. But I think there probably comes a point where you do have to look at him as a historical figure and analyse the social complexities that were existing around him at the time and what happened to him as a person and the impact that would have had. And none of that is really there.
I've got to say that for me as a young man around just turning 20 when it was becoming public knowledge that Freddie Mercury was gay, I can remember quite clearly someone saying, what bands do you like? And I mentioned Queen, and they were like, oh, it's a gay band. And I hadn't even known they were a gay band at that moment.
Yeah.
And I thought about that for a long time, and this was 1990s Australia, which was a little less enlightened than it is today. Not totally horrid, but, you know, not as accepting of LGBTIQ issues as we are now. And I remember thinking, oh, well, so what?
I know, but that's you.
Yeah, that's me. But it normalised homosexuality in my mind in ways that I hadn't come to terms with before that.
Yeah, well, but that isn't addressed in this film.
Yeah.
That is actually, his homosexuality is to some extent just brushed under the carpet a bit.
Mm.
And it's also there's an odd message because Freddie Mercury went through a massive partying phase, which is shown in this film a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Not, I don't think, to the extent that it happened, but it's definitely implied he was taking drugs and probably having a lot of group sex and a lot of sexual partners. But it's sort of, the message you get is that, so then he gets with Jim Hutton in what appears to be in this film to be a committed monogamous relationship. And that's sort of made out to be like, oh, well, he's saved now. He's in a...
safe relationship.
Yeah, he's in as close you can get to a heteronormative relationship in a gay relationship, and now he's okay.
Mm.
But that's not at all what happened. He did not stay monogamous with Jim Hutton.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, they would have had that. I'm assuming that was all consensual and whatever. But the messaging around it is if you pair up in a nice, normal couple, you'll be
Things
okay.
are better. Yeah.
Things are better. And that's kind of not cool because that's not what happened.
You're talking more about an implication, though, than they don't carve that in stone.
I think the messaging's pretty clear.
Yeah, I mean, as well as that, they do...
I mean, they turn up the next day after he's gone on his first date with Jim Hutton and his house is all clean. because he's cleaned up all the beer bottles and cocaine off the tables, and I'm in a committed relationship now, so my life's going to be fine.
Well, Jim definitely liked beer, and who knows how he felt about cocaine. But...
Well, exactly. So I just think I don't know, it was not I think it was a bit of a nasty spin on it in the end, really.
It's funny because I knew a lot of LGBTIQ people who were somewhat concerned about the movie before it came out because they'd heard about how they'd toned down that aspect of Freddy's life. And you know what? There's not one of them of my acquaintance who didn't watch the movie and come out and go, "It was so great, I loved it so much." So I feel, admittedly in my smallest sample size, there's some acceptance of it in that quarter.
Well, I mean, the thing, though, is it's still reasonably rare to have a film that stars a obviously gay character as the main central character of a movie.
Yeah.
And in a way that person is idealised. And this film is still a bit of a rarity because of that.
That could be why, yeah. So
that might be why. I can't speak for the whole entire gay community, or even probably any of them. But I can empathise and try and, be a good ally.
Sure. Okay, is there anything else you'd like to say on this?
Look, I think I would be giving this 5 stars if it wasn't for my personal objection to the way the homosexuality and HIV aspects of the story were dealt with. And that I just felt it was a bit surface level. And I felt the whole thing was surface level, but primarily that aspect. Yeah,
I felt it would have been a 6-hour film if it had got under the surface, though.
But I'm going to give it 4 stars.
Yeah, 4 stars from me as well. As a Queen fan, I mean, basically, there's just a bunch of Queen music. So if you like Queen music, it's great. If, like Sheridan, though, you come to it and you're like, I don't really know if I like Queen, and you watch it and think, oh, I do like Queen. Firstly, there's a lot of their music that's not in this film, so that's something to look for. And I'd also say there's several documentaries out there. There's some on YouTube. I think there's one on Netflix that go a lot deeper into the dynamics of the band, and there are some very funny stories involved in that. And I would highly recommend digging deeper into them. They're an interesting band, and their music is still quite a lot of fun to listen to.
Oh, and you'll have to try and spot Mike Myers in the film.
Oh, I didn't see Mike Myers. Was he the guy at the truck stop?
No.
No. Okay. All right. There's a challenge for you.
I'll tell you at the end.
Okay.
After this. What's next?
Letters.
We finally have letters.
We have correspondence. If you'd like your email read out, then send it to gmtrpodcast@gmail.com. And you too can join this illustrious company. So our first up is from a Mr. Loose Brown. What sort of person do you think Loose Brown is, Sheridan?
Well, I would say that it's someone quite open-minded and appreciates a good use of swearing.
Would you? You'd think
every
that,
now
you?
And again.
So this is all in block caps, which is the sort of email we really do enjoy. Why, oh why, does Sheridan swear? ? I had my kids in the car, thinking this was a wholesome program, and she said a disgusting slur that sounds with bull. We were horrified! ! Well, what do you have to say to that, Sheridan?
Well, I could say something, but John's going to have to beep it out. I think someone called Loose Brown would probably have kids that are used to swearing or listening to swearing, but I will try and tone it down.
Okay.
Just for that person.
So
now I'm feeling awkward.
So we've learnt a lesson from this. This is good.
I can't take criticism.
If there are other lessons you'd like Sheridan to learn, do send them to gmtrpodcast@gmail.com. Or indeed, if you think there are lessons I should learn. I am also open to that. And we have another email, Sheridan. Also to gmtrpodcast@gmail.com. It is from Cornelius. He says, I saw your review of IO. I fell asleep during this dull piece of crap. It looked good, but crap. That is an hour of my life I will not get back. Thank you very much, Cornelius. We agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah, what did we rate then again? Not very highly, did we?
Not very highly, no. Although,
I still feel like I'm on that little hill with that woman. Just thinking about the movie, I just feel so...
You've never left the hill.
Why didn't she get off?
She did.
Why did it take so long?
Spoilers. Okay, so yes, you can email us at, what's the address again?
I don't know.
I've just said it 6 times. gmtrpodcast@gmail.com, or leave a comment on any of the associated social media. We will try to be back next week. We apologise for the little hiatus we've just had.
Sometimes it's really hard watching a lot of TV.
It's hard for Sheridan. Everything's hard for Sheridan.
Well, no. I mean, watching TV, I like it, obviously. I talk about it in a podcast, but sometimes it's hard to fit it into life.
All right. Okay. Good night, folks.
Good night.